My name's Roslyn Taylor. This is the first lecture at the Freiburg New Church Assembly on Thursday, the 30th of August. I had to look at my phone to July. I looked at my phone and I still got it wrong. Okay, it's July and welcome. And so, as you can see, I'm going to be talking about that old serpent. This week, Susanna asked us to look at maybe the continuous internal sense in the word. And as Susanna told us, there's a continuous story in the literal sense, which starts with creation, and then all the escapades of the children of Israel. And then the next thing is a Jewish rabbi called Jesus, and some revelations that occurred about 100 years after his death. It took Susanna 35 minutes, took me 1 minute. But that's sort of like a continuous story that spans, centuries. But the internal sense, as explained by Swedenborg, also, we are told, has a continuous sense from the creation of our spirits all the way to some kind of regeneration, and also tells the story of Jesus's life, born as a human, transformed into a divine, the glorification. But as how it kind of moves continuously is maybe not explained. At least I'm not aware of anything like that. The internal sense of a specific story and how the words flow from one to another, and that sort of continuity, but looking at the whole picture. So then I was curious about, well, if you take an element that's at the beginning of the word and then when it shows up again at the end of the word, how has it changed over time? And that might give you an indication of how the continuous internal sense is working. Clark gave us an example of Solomon was a king in the Old Testament and Jesus is a king in the New Testament. So, and that gave us an idea, if we'd had maybe more time to hear about Jesus, but how that kingship kind of changed over time from being a worldly king to the kingdom of heaven. So I chose the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and then it shows up again in the book of Revelation as the great red dragon. And I do apologize for those of you who were here I think it was maybe 2 years ago, I don't know, I gave a lecture about the great red dragon, and here I am again. It must have some deep meaning for me, which I haven't quite explored yet. It might be obvious to all of you, but not to me. But anyway, so that's the one that I want to sort of follow and see what does it mean in the beginning, in the internal sense? What does it mean at the end? And what can we deduce from that, if anything? Come in. About the continuity of the internal sense. So if we could have the next slide, please. The serpent, the shrewd serpent. Okay, wait, where did I leave my glasses? Oh, right here. Genesis 3, verses 1 and then 14 to 15. Now the serpent was shrewder than any of the wild animals that the Lord God had made. The Lord God said to the serpent, and this is a little break in there where he deceived Eve. Because you've done this, cursed are you above all the cattle and all the living creatures of the field. On your belly you will crawl, and dust you will eat all the days of your life. And I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. So, being shrewd, the serpent found a way to deceive Eve into believing that it was okay to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, even though the divine had told Adam and Eve not to eat that. And after that deception, the serpent is cursed to be ground-dwelling, which of course raises the question, like, what did it look like before that? Like, did it have wings or standing up? Like some kind of serpent. Maybe it had little legs. I don't know. Something, it was a lizard. I don't know. It changed. And But even though it was cursed, it could still do harm. It could still bite your heel. Growing up in Australia, that's a very, a danger that we live with. It doesn't just bite you, it kills you, but, it can still do harm. And so if we could have the next slide, please, about being seduced by the sensory mind. Now, this quote is from A.E., Apocalypse Explained. I just want to make a little side note about, there are two books that Swedenborg wrote that explain the meaning of apocalypse. One is Apocalypse Revealed, which focuses more on the historical churches, from the most ancient church to the Christian church, and sort of how the book of Revelation tells that story. The other book, Apocalypse Explained, which he never published, and he didn't finish, I think he got up to like chapter 12 or something, focuses more on the individual personal story of regeneration rather than the changes in the church, more like the changes in our regeneration, our spiritual path. I've just got to say my personal favorite is A.E., even though he never published it, and so the conservative side of me says, well, he didn't publish it, it's not really theological, but actually it is really theological and I love it. Anyway, A.E. 739, and this is about the meaning of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. The serpent signifies that they, which is the people in the most ancient church. So hang on, I just told you that A.E. doesn't talk about the churches, and here it is. It does sometimes talk about the churches. Okay. Those people were seduced by the sensual because it stands next to the world and thus is sensitive to every pleasure and delight from the world. From these it is in fallacies and is ignorant of and also rejects heavenly things. The serpent means the sensual, and no other sensual than the sensual of such people. So maybe we can't really extrapolate that to us, but I'm just definitely going to make an extrapolation to us. The serpent is the devil and Satan because the sensual communicates with hell and makes one with it, for in it resides all the evil of humankind in the complex. And because humans from the sensual reason from fallacies and from the delights of the loves of the world and of the body, and indeed skillfully and cunningly, therefore it is said that the serpent was more subtle than any wild beast of the field which Jehovah had made. So that's that serpent that we saw the picture of, the sensual. And then at the end of the Bible, we have the next slide, if we have a slide mover. Coming up to the end of the Bible, book of Revelation, the great red dragon. This is from Revelation 12, verse 9. So that huge dragon, the ancient serpent, the one called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world, was thrown down to the earth, and his angels along with him. So now the serpent has been transformed from just being a shrewd animal that's on the ground to being the devil and Satan. It's become a lot more malicious. And it deceives the whole world. It's not just having a private one-on-one conversation with a woman and saying, you can eat this fruit. It's deceiving the whole world. And now it has an arm. I feel like I lost sound. Did I? Nope. And now it has an army of messengers ready to fight, instead of just sort of, like I said, working one-on-one in a subtle, individual way. So already you can see that there's been some kind of change in this serpent. Besides, now it's got, behold the great red dragon with 7 heads and 7 crowns and 10 horns. Yeah, that's what it's got. I have to sing the song to remember all the numbers in the right sequence. So it also is about the sensual, as we will find out, and as you would expect, because it's really the same old serpent, just upgraded to becoming a horrendous dragon. So if I could have the next slide, please. It's all about the becoming sensual. Here we have another reading from A.E. This is 739, and it's about what I just read from Revelation. And that great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, signifies that those who were in the evils of life and who had thence become sensual and had perverted all things of the word and thus of the church were separated from heaven and were cast down into hell. This is set at the time of the Last Judgment. Now, it's also treated perhaps more in AR, Apocalypse Revealed, that it's more about separating faith from charity. It doesn't specifically maybe say becoming sensual. So the way I put that together is if you're focusing on your beliefs, on what's true, on your thinking, and just disregarding charity, kindness, and love to other people, then the sort of natural path of that is you're going to focus on yourself instead of the other people. Love of self, love of the world will become what's ruling you rather than love of the neighbor and love to the Lord. And that's when you become sensual, by focusing on yourself, your personal experience. So I thought maybe the next slide would help with this. Sense-related definitions. Okay, sensory is a neutral term that just describes the function of our 5 physical senses. Sensuous is a positive term, and it's the enjoyment, aesthetic enjoyment of the senses, like loving beauty, like taking stuff in and really enjoying it. And sensual is a negative word, or has a negative connotation for most people, I guess, about focusing on bodily pleasures and appetites and desires. And so my conclusion is that Swedenborg seems to, sometimes he means sensory and sometimes he means sensual, but there's a translation problem because both AE and AR translations, I think, were last done in the 1890s. I don't think that there's a new one since then. Yeah, so the language was used a little differently more than 125 years ago. Sort of rule of thumb, when Swedenborg's writing about the outermost level or the outermost part of your mind or yourself, the part that responds just to what your 5 senses are bringing into your body, that's when he means what we would say sensory, neutral. But when he's describing a spiritual dynamic where sense-based experiences become the entire focus and the pleasure from them become the focus of a person's life, that's when the term for us would be sensual. So that was confusing in the readings that I did because he's just using sensual all over the place and you're like, well, it can't all be bad. And in fact, I think that maybe it was Sage that made this point earlier that the sensory mind in itself is not evil or harmful. Did you say something like that, Sage? Something like that. Yeah. In itself, it's just a level of your mind or a level, a part of yourself that's dealing with the sensory input from the world that we live in, that we're created to live in. And that's, in that sensory mind is where you enjoy things like yummy food or hearing a baby give that wonderful belly laugh or, seeing a child playing out a story on the ground or whatever. And the beauty of nature, like the awe that you feel with an incredible sunrise or sunset, that's your sensory mind. Nothing wrong with that. It's beautiful. We're given that. It's a gift. But the problem comes when that becomes the focus of your life. When your life is just all about those things and you're not willing to elevate your mind into maybe something a little higher. Maybe you can't anymore. Maybe you're so engrossed in these things that there's just no interest in or just inability to look beyond that. She says drinking her tea because of the caffeine and how it makes her feel. Okay. But that concept of there's a certain level of your mind that you can operate from, and then there's an elevation to maybe something higher, reminds me of a saying that I used to hear. I haven't heard it so much recently, but anyway, it's attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt, but actually there was an English historian, Henry Thomas Buckle, who said this first, also at the end of the 19th century. And here it is. Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events. Small minds discuss people. Has anybody heard that before? Great minds discuss ideas. Average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. Who's got a subscription to People magazine? No, just okay. So Buckle was suggesting when he said that you can sort of roughly measure people's intelligence by what they talk about. whether it's a lower focus or a higher focus. So like maybe a Swedenborgian retweaking of that, looking at the different levels of your mind, you could see that great minds, average minds, and small minds are within us. It's a very logopraxis kind of thing to do. They're not categories of people outside of us. We don't need to use that to judge other people, but we can just look within inside us. So maybe the small mind is our sensory mind. And, definitely challenge me on this. I'm just making this up. The small mind within us focuses on self and bodily pleasures, material possessions, is not necessarily kind at all to other people, sees them as objects or for manipulation, what you can get from other people. That's the small mind when it's become the focus, the corrupted small mind. The average mind could be the rational mind, where we see it sort of bridges the sensory mind and the higher mind. The average mind, it focuses on facts, religious teachings, laws, intellectual concepts, how you get about whatever kind of work you're involved in. And while it can understand truth and morality in a sort of a logical way, it still can be very corrupted and self-serving. And that's before it's lifted up even higher. But that's the average mind. And then the great mind would be those higher levels, the spiritual level and the celestial level. I'm just going to call that all the spiritual mind. And that is where we can experience love of other people, love of the divine, and where we can focus on use, bringing great ideas from the rational mind and great love from our higher mind together and focus on use. Usefulness to self, but also usefulness to the human family. So, going back to the small mind, the sensory, we're going to just forget those nice higher levels and go back to the small mind, the sensory mind, the serpent. That old serpent is that old familiar feeling of being roped in by your sensory mind, by your sensory experiences. It might be, that old serpent might be when you go back to get more of Chris's wonderful coffee cake, even though you know you don't need it, but it's so good, you just want it. Or it might get you when you sort of hear a snippet of conversation going on between two people, and in a very paranoid way you think they're talking about me. What are they saying about me? That's your sensory mind acting up. That's the serpent in you. Or maybe it might rope you in when you're justifying buying for yourself that thing that'll make you look really dope or really young or really old, whatever you want to look, And it has no real value other than how you think it's going to help you present to other people. Those are the kind of fallacies that your sensual mind will create when it becomes overly attached to the pleasures and, the quote from Swedenborg is, to every pleasure and delight from the world. And that's how you can get led from just enjoying your sensory mind to becoming sensual. So, back to the Genesis story about the serpent. The inner meaning is about the earliest people being seduced by their attachment to their sensory minds and ending up communicating with hellish spirits. But it could also be, you could think about it as the early stages of your first spiritual awakening. I'm putting it in the early thing because it's like there's creation, and then you immediately get into the serpent starting to do its work of seduction. So that's why I have posited that it's about our very first spiritual awakening, the beginning of that, probably in adolescence, something like that. And we do, every one of us, come to a point where we have to deal with the fallacies that our corrupted sensory minds are suggesting. That thought that this thing or activity or substance or obsession, whatever it is in my physical environment, that's what's really going to make me happy and I want more of that. Rather than, I really feel great when I help other people, that's a different kind of pleasure. But we have to deal with that. Like, am I going to keep on doing these sensory things, or am I going to allow some of these higher pleasures in? And in the Revelation story of the dragon, that serpent of old, which is your clue that it's about the one at the beginning. Otherwise, I don't think I would necessarily have made that connection, but it's clear in the literal sense. It's the serpent of old that's been upped, transferred, made greater by, in a bad way. The dragon represents, this is the one treatment, Christian leaders who had consciously and repeatedly made evil choices in the way that they lived their lives. So now they're in the spiritual world, and this again is set at the last judgment. Those Christian leaders had completely rejected the word and the divine, or the teachings about loving other people, loving the divine, and they no longer experienced heavenly states themselves, and they were teaching this to other people. Just focus on your faith alone. You don't have to worry about good works. That's a falsity, don't worry about that. And so they ended up, of course, becoming hellish, because the alternative is love of self. And so those people were basically fell down into hell, cast down to the earth. And again, it's because they were teaching faith separated from charity. So if the focus, like I said, is on what your thoughts are, what your thinking is, what your belief structure is, and your focus is not on how you can be useful and helpful and loving to other people, then you will end up rejecting what's taught in the word about loving other people and creating community. So Swedenborg does write about the Christian leaders, but obviously it applies to us equally as Christian followers, that we can make those evil choices. And I don't like the word evil, but I'm using it here because it's in the text. I tend to think about limited, like you're living into your limitations as a human being. And you can call that evil, or you can just be maybe a little less condemning and call it limitation. I'm very happy to have that conversation. But anyway, we can make those kind of choices when we succumb to our sensory level and the fallacies and the seduction that it has for us. And then we could end up living consistently in hellish states of minds, which then, when it's our personal judgment, that's where we want to live, in a hellish state, in a hellish place. But the point really is that both the serpent in Genesis and the dragon in Revelation tell us about ways that we deal with our sensory minds. If I could please have the next slide, and it's the last one, you'll be happy to know. Dealing with your sensory mind is basically what that old serpent is all about. So the first picture with the little snake, I don't know if you can see that from way down there, but that's the original photo that I had. There's a snake in the camouflage by the gravel. In the beginning of our life, the beginning of our spiritual life, after our spiritual awakening, we'd have to deal with a sensory mind and how to manage it. And that's fairly neutral. It's a task of spiritual development. How are we going to deal with this? What are we going to do? Are we going to continue to be succumbed by it, or are we going to kind of say, I'm just going to put sensory pleasures the way I want them, the way I want to enjoy them, but I don't want it to run my life? But in Revelation, with the great red dragon, maybe in mature life, maybe in life after death, if we've chosen to just really focus on those sensory pleasures and have become sensual, like our life is only about that, we've chosen to embrace those false sensual notions, and the sensory level of our mind is corrupted, and that might be a choice that we make. And so our life becomes like the great red dragon. So looking at that, starting off with just how do we manage it, it's not a problem. It's just how are we going to manage the sensory input to going to the point of where it's captivated. We're captivated by those sensual fallacies, and that's what we've chosen. So maybe that's an indication that the continuous internal sense is about the development and functioning of our minds. And that probably comes as no surprise to you, but I had to go through this whole exercise of looking at to come up with that thought that it might start the development and functioning of our minds in the very earliest stages, the sort of the creation of who we are. And then after a lifetime of all the struggles and all the battles, and maybe we do end up succumbing, after a lifetime of choices, and we might choose to end up being a bit of a dragon, entirely captivated by our faulty thinking that's based on our physical senses, and rejecting the divine and rejecting love of the neighbor, love to the divine. But we do have another choice. We might reject the serpent somewhere along the line in our spiritual development. And we might just let go of those and put the sensory mind in the level that it's supposed to be, with openness to the higher levels. And if we do that consistently, we'll end up with a new heaven and a new earth. We'll end up being the bride of the Lamb. We'll end up being a new church, individually and collectively. The new heaven is the higher thoughts, the new earth is our outer mind. It might all be transformed into this beautiful image of a bride, of the bride of the Lamb. And so I conclude what I have to say. I'm very interested to hear what you have to say.
I'm reminded with the people who are embracing the sensual fallacies that there was a bumper sticker probably 20 years ago, but it said, "He who dies with the most toys wins." And I remember thinking that that was so useless.
Yeah.
You know, you win what? You just have a lot of things. And that, I mean, it's just one of the reasons I've never bought a lottery ticket. I don't want to have that amount of responsibility to deal with that. But I just think that that's a big part of our society, is getting lots of toys.
Yes, materialism.
Yes, I will say something. I was thinking that one way the serpent uses the sensory and fallacies to seduce us can be that, oh, the only thing you can trust is science that is based on observations with your senses. Everything else is not reality. And that's very seductive. And a lot of people reject theology and things about God because that's not based on the senses.
Right. Thankfully, there are people who want to integrate science and faith, or science and religion and higher thoughts. But yes, it's a very sensual, really, or sensory, probably experience or focus. And I'm glad it's there. I mean, we're alive, we live long lives. We, send rockets off to the moon or whatever as a result. But yeah. Thank you. Oh, Sage.
Yeah, I often think of materialism as a synonym for the sensory, that focus on the material. And it makes me think of Helen Keller, who had limited senses. And on some level, maybe that was part of how she was able to perceive truth more adequately. The rest of us just sort of look at this world and we take it that that's what's true, right? And we take that, oh, kings are more important than peasants, and this is true because this is what I see in the world that's being offered to me. So I think that's, part of the sensory. And it can be about eating lots of cake and like wanting sensual experiences, but I think it's more about being shaped by our expectations of the material realm. So we could be just as sensually, focused by limiting our amount of cake because we want to be, we want our bodies to be perfect, right? There can be, I think that's a temptation sometimes to think we can control our sensory impulse by majorly aesthetic practices, and that was something Swedenborg, right, was kind of critical of. So that's the mystery of the new church, is how to appreciate our senses, but not to be driven by this material plane, but by these higher ideals. Because we're still going to need to eat, and food is still going to taste good. All of that can continue. So thank you for your talk, Ross.
Well, and thank you for lifting that up, because that is something that I didn't go into. That I'm not advocating that you. I see you're back there, Dean. But I'm not advocating suffering and denial and all of that as a spiritual path. Maybe it works for some people. Anyway, maybe it works, but the point is to get in balance, to enjoy
You take this for now.
Oh, this. Oh, yeah, I'll
Yeah, this for now. I'll take this and fix it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yes, 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 yes. Okay. And you have one as well? No. Oh, okay. Because Dean is up next. Yeah. So I, there's a place for it. We have a sensory mind
Hello,
for
hello.
a reason.
Here, I have
It's
the second
really
mic. Hold on.
about not focusing on it in a negative way. Like Sage said, like you could be denying yourself food and over exercising so that you look good. But that's not a good thing either. Okay, Dean?
I want to explore the idea of sensual and sensuality in terms of materialism. I'm hearing this word materialism, and I personally have never had experience of anything other than the material world. Okay? And I feel that this sensual business, I know he's writing from hundreds of years ago, but I hear such condemnation in or anyways, when you're truly on the earth, you can reach states of material flow, perhaps through sensuality, through the love of another, appreciating people. I feel it's much more a balance than it is a condemnation.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Sage mentioning Helen Keller reminded me something basic, which I hate to admit, but I think is true. And I've known it, told myself this for years, that I think I would be better at picking a partner if I was blind and didn't depend on physical attractiveness. So Helen Keller, I mean, I don't want to be blind, but I think that it's, too many people put too much on beauty and attractiveness and from the senses rather than the person. So thanks for reminding me of that.
And I guess another thought I have about that is it's a God-given gift to be attracted to other people on how they appear physically to us. The purpose of creation is supposedly, or so we're told, the creation of a heaven from the human family, and that wouldn't happen if we weren't attracted to each other, having sex, and having babies. So, like, it's part of it, but if it becomes the focus, if it's an addiction, no, that's a bad thing. But enjoying your sensuality, so it's okay that you can see, that you can be attracted. Blind dates. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you're next.
I appreciate you putting them all together. So thank you. It was wonderful. I think when I'm thinking about the whole process of the three of them together, when we look at Revelation and we look at the development of heavenly consciousness, I've been working on the temperance movement in my work, and I've looked at it in a way to say, when we did prohibition for alcoholism, it became worse. And I think there's that presence between maybe the 3 R's with each other. Maybe we temperance ourselves with the 3 R's and we move ourselves in between these things. But the sensuality of the physical form has been such a gift. And I worked a lot with Kirpala Yoga Center because I taught cooking and I taught the sensuality of food and I taught the sensuality of life. And I really believe in the yoga tradition, there was a lot of richness around the senses in a positive direction because we have to feel the physical form. And sexuality is such a powerful gift, that sensual consciousness of, being with another. There's all the other materialistic, I would say, sensibilities more than sensual, but the sensibilities in our society is all based on the feminine, look good, small body, all of that. But when you look back at the goddess tradition, there's this whole big body, big breasts, big, that was the beauty. And a lot of cultures are still there. America is not. And I think we've got to look at cultural understanding of these as well. So that's all I had to say today.
And I would just finesse maybe a little bit that white America is about skinny females, but other parts of the American community are not necessarily.
Yeah, and just a few hundred years ago, poor people were always skinny, and the wealthy people were not skinny.
I just wanted to say something about, we're talking about attractiveness. I want to say about the eyes. Because when you talk to someone, if you really are communicating with them and you're looking at their eyes, you're looking at their soul. You're not just looking at the person and all of what they're wearing and how their hairstyle looks. You're looking at the soul. So Swedenborg wrote a lot about how we communicate through our eyes, our lips with our speech, and through our whole bodies. And that these levels of communication, you could get lost in any of them and get all, sensual or sense-oriented about what the body looks like or how your face looks and did you put on your makeup right in the morning. But the real key person is in your eyes. So that, I think, is where we get to that glorious part of connecting with people where we've communed as souls, not as people who look like a certain way.
And we've communed as souls because of the sensory experience of seeing their eyes. Like, it's all part of the, yeah.
Are we supposed to say our names? We haven't been doing that. I'm Jessie. I'm going back to the idea that the serpent is when you're sensual, in his words, which means when you're overwhelmed by your sensual needs or focus. Not that everything is bad that's sensual or sensory. And I like that image of the snake, that can bite you, or this dragon that can, devour you, because if you let that be the only thing, it is going to devour you. And you can't, if that's your life and you're not even thinking about others, you're trying to do what you can to get what you need, and you don't care whether you trample over others, whether it's money or drugs or power or whatever you're seeking, and you're not even thinking that like other people might be in need or their feelings might be hurt, it is going to devour you, and you're not going to feel very good also, and you're certainly not thinking about the Lord. So I think of the dragon and the serpent as sort of the end, the end result of being overwhelmed by the sensual, not just that every sensual piece is a dragon or a snake, I guess.
And Leah's got a question or a comment.
Thank you for this lecture very much. And I'm reminded, too, that in the Gospel of John, Jesus says, just as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so will I, when I am lifted up, bring all people unto myself. And he's making a reference to himself as deliberately as both Moses and the serpent when he's lifted up on the cross. So he becomes the sensual, the embodied God who is stricken down, but who can strike down, like in the sense of being embodied, right? Being the sensual, that united to the divine heals all, right? Brings everybody to himself, because, the great uniting, that's not to be imperialist about the Christian tradition, and that's a Christian reading of the Hebrew scripture. But I find that so moving, that pulling from the image in the desert. And these comments and questions and your lecture really brought that home for me in a new way. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, beautifully said. And that is maybe a Christianizing the Hebrew scriptures. And Swedenborg definitely does that, but he also lifts up that same thought, that it's the sensual mind of Jesus, being glorified to becoming the divine human, that is a lifting up that happened to Jesus, and that is a path that we can follow too, of being lifted up. Because, yeah, it's a little mysterious about this snake. I don't have my prop because Kevin is actually walking with it because he fell down the steps last night. But, like raising up a serpent, that doesn't seem like the likely thing that would heal people. But that's the symbolism of it, as you mentioned. Like that's, really great. And we have battling curries. Okay, Dean first, and okay, and then Susanna.
I just want to temper just the comments I made earlier in the light of what especially Leah said, that every moment we have a choice between being curious about what's happening to us or being scared to death and run away. Every single moment. So isn't it true? I feel like it's true that I've done a lot of stupid things in my life and they're fading away now. And I see that I was a fool. I am a fool. And that I'm a simple person in that way.
Oh, let me add to that. I've heard and I've experienced myself as I get older that I think the hells attack us more with reminding us of our mistakes in the past and to try to forgive ourselves and not be.
Actually, that's very much what I wanted to say, but you asked about the lifting up of the serpent. Swedenborg wrote that we can't heal the evils that have influenced us until we see them. So lifting up of the serpent is like saying, look at this. Look at how this is affecting you. And do you want it? As Dean said, are you making a choice for this, or are you making a choice for the Lord? And I think that we need each other to support us in continuing to choose the Lord. And that is, in its highest sense, I think, what church is for, to be a community of people, because everybody's going to go up and down in their faith journey, but a community that can lift you up when you fall down, show you the serpent when you need to see it, and then help you work out what that means to you. So I feel so blessed to be in community here.
And definitely, sort of tangentially maybe, but in the 12-step programs, that is a big part of it. Of course, you have to yourself identify that something has been overwhelming you, some kind of sensual addiction kind of thing has overwhelmed you. It isn't necessarily a substance. It could be anger. I did the 12 steps around anger, the great red dragon in Roz. But whatever it is, it's in community. You have a sponsor and you have to tell that person and they reflect back to you. Like it's not just you individually. It's very grounded that way.
So, does this thing work? Yeah. Oh, okay. So, as someone who has 32 years in a 12-step program, I want to speak about that. My experience has been that there's basic things that this boils down to, and what's really interesting is it can often come to the 7 deadly sins. Crazily enough, it's and to the bottom core, often it's fear. And the whole concept that the opposite of fear is faith. And people forget that you don't have to believe in God. All you have to believe is that there's something bigger than you. And if there was such a thing, it could do something. And that can be a path to God. That God sometimes will speak to someone that has gone so far down that all they want to do is die. And that death is more attractive than life itself. And if you, so all the talk about God or having to believe in something will turn you away. But everybody at their core, that's that spark. So it's not so intellectual as all that. So I really believe that the serpent, I love the story of Adam and Eve because that serpent, that temptation, I want to look for the thing that takes me outside of myself because I don't want to look at anything. So I'm just going to think nothing, have no feelings, have nothing, because that's easier, because that's fear. And when you can get some faith, whatever it is, then the community surrounds. And the more you open, it's like the spiritual, where you do things because you think you ought to, and then the celestial angels, you just do things. Imagine what it would be like to never, not even imagine doing anything but out of love. You know, you probably can't get there till we are gone. But that's the thing, that the light that takes us all the way through from despair, darkness, and up. And that's what I think the serpent is.
Wow, thank you, Carol. Wow. Well, thank you all very much. Dan's looking at his watch. How am I doing? Time to quit? 2 minutes? All right. Yes, we have, Clark has his hand.
One way to see the resolution to the conflict between the sensual and the higher degrees is to recognize that they're always in relationship. And the sensual corresponds to the deeper realities and is produced out of it. So if I live that way, then whenever something sensual attracts me, I stop and look to see what is its relationship to the deeper parts of myself. And in that work, I can really delight in that second piece of coffee cake because it is serving my soul. Or not.
Yeah, so they are correspondence between the levels of the mind, correspondence between maybe a deeper love and then the senses that you're experiencing.
Rather than conflictual, they are in relationship.
Rather than conflictual, they're in relationship. Well, thank you for that. And so now let us extend our relationships over coffee and a little break until 10 o'clock, when Gard will be up here with another talk.